So today we have the opportunity to spend some time with these amazing teachings on the 37 practices of a bodhisattva. So this is like holding this set of practices, but it's of an ideal that we can aspire to. And especially with this topic today, I found it kind of challenging actually to really try to work out. And so, maybe we use this time to try to really look at ourselves and deepen our understanding and know that this is a very worthwhile effort, and that by doing this we'll really be of much greater benefit to all that we meet. Our lives will be much more peaceful, and may we really have a long-term vision in mind of what our capacity is as human beings and as sentient beings. So may we use this time to work towards what is really our greatest potential of what we can be doing with our life and what we can achieve. And may this benefit all that we meet. So we're on verse 14, and the header of this chapter is Facing Blame, which we're in this section of the book now where they're taking kind of difficult circumstances in our lives and then using them along the path to benefit ourselves, to benefit others. So using difficult circumstances in our spiritual practice. So we have amazingly, in the teachings in our tradition, there are teachings that can help us to take any circumstance that we come up against in our life and use them in a positive way. So as a woman who used to live here, Zopa, say, don't waste that suffering. Use it. So there's ways to do that. And so this is one that has the main thrust of this verse has to do with attachment to reputation. So I'll first read the verse. Even if someone broadcasts all kinds of unpleasant remarks about you throughout the 3,000 worlds, in return with a loving mind, speak of his good qualities. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So there's this notion that actually Geshe Sonam Rinchen talks about, that even these great meditators, they go off, solitary retreat or whatever, and even then they still have they might be able to give up this wish for really good clothes or really good food, but reputation is really a lot harder. And this is what he says the hardest to give up of these kind of things. So this is kind of the challenge of this. The challenge that we have actually is to recognize when we're having attachment to reputation and what we can do about that. So first, I think we have to understand a little bit what attachment is. Attachment means that we're kind of clinging or desiring something, and we're making it into something that it really isn't. Like we're amplifying or exaggerating the good qualities of something, or maybe even superimposing qualities that aren't there. And so, an easier example is to use something like maybe ice cream. Everybody likes ice cream. And we think that the ice cream is so great from its own side, right? But actually, ice cream, if you eat it continuously, it makes you sick. So as ice cream isn't really good from its own side in that way. We get this pleasure when we just even think of it or when we first have it, and we're exaggerating the qualities that are in that. And so that's kind of what attachment does. So So imagine that this happens to you, that somebody, and actually this is what happened in the story. You'll see the story like totally fits this verse, but that comes at the end. So, but okay, say someone says something about you and it gets broadcast widely. It's on the TV news and it's all over the internet and it's just gone everywhere, which is kind of what the 3,000 Worlds stands for. So and they're kind of savage about it all, and they ruin your reputation and they say things that are dreadful, whether they're true or not. It doesn't almost matter. They could be true, they might not be true. Either way, imagine that you don't have any recourse, that there's nothing you can really do about it, which was kind of the situation in the story. You don't have the chance to clear your name. So what would you do in response? Think about it. I would probably get pretty upset. Why? Because we're so attached to our reputation. It's so easy. I mean, even little things happen. They aren't even broadcast. They're only broadcast between two people, and we get really upset with these kind of situations. So, we're really attached to our reputation, and the more attached we are, the more upset we get. Which, and why is that? And this is really was the question I was asking myself all week when I was thinking about this. Because there was so little written, I thought, wow, I'm really going to have to delve into this because I need to fill up some time here, And so I thought about it a lot. And, I only answered it in certain ways, but I'll present what my reflections said. But one of the things that Venerable says in this book is because they don't understand how wonderful we are, And so, we think we're so wonderful, and they're saying something that, it's like it's this mismatch going on, and so we get upset. So in Venerable's usual style, she says, well, what will we do in such a situation? Will we take out a full-page ad in the New York Times to explain our side of the story? Will we criticize them in return? We get on our Facebook and whatever it is. Or will we curl up in a ball and feel sorry for ourselves? All these kind of things that we might do in response actually don't help the situation at all. They don't change that the words were said particularly. They don't change it. They don't help. So instead, if we look at what Togme Sampo, who's the author of the 37 Practices, what he says is, speak of their good qualities with a loving mind. And we're kind of going, wow, he's nuts. What is he saying? Because it also seems impossible when you're in that state of mind. And that's the thing I found in my reflections. It was so interesting to bring up a situation. With these kind of teachings, you want to make examples from your own life. This is what we're trying to do, is work on our own lives. So you can take up an example of your own life and look at it and, see when your mind is one way, how it looks and how your mind feels and what kind of thoughts you have. And when your mind's another way, you look at it, and it's very interesting to do. And so when your mind is in a certain frame, this seems impossible to do, actually. Like, how could I ever say good things about that person with a loving mind? Because you're so angry and upset then, your mind can't hold. You can't actually have those two states of mind at the same time. You can't have anger and loving kindness at the same time. So that's just how we're wired. And so basically what happens is our self-centered mind gets kind of churned up, and we can't imagine any way to even find any good qualities in the person. So how are we going to say anything good about them? Because we're angry. They don't have any good qualities. And that's what anger does. Anger exaggerates the negative qualities of something. So in that, when the mind is holding that, there's nothing good to be said about the person. They're just 100% jerk, So it's interesting to see then how our self-centered mind is functioning in that situation. And, it's like, it's not really realistic at all. It's really out to lunch. And this is but with those states of mind, we're evaluating people, we're evaluating situations. And so basically what it will come down to, if we kind of live in an automatic way, is that when people say things about us that we don't like, then we just don't like them. It's that simple. And so that's a really odd criteria for evaluating things. Because what if they're saying is true? What if what the person is saying is true? And what if they're trying to help you? And what do you know about the person's motivation or even their situation? We're in that moment trying to protect ourselves from any type of criticism and any unhappiness. So where I reflected on this was to look at these different states of mind that came up. And, I have a couple strong incidents that I can bring up that were very charged for me. And I can look at them with these kind of different mind states. And, when you look at the thoughts that are going on when your mind is quite peaceful, and then you look at the thoughts that are going on when your mind is afflicted, essentially, you can't. It's so funny. When my mind was peaceful, I was like, how could I even think that? Like, I can't imagine how these thoughts even work. But then when my mind was angry, those thoughts made all kinds of sense. They just like, oh yeah, that's what's going on here. So, yeah, it's just really something to look at. And the reason why it's so important is because I remember Venerable saying once years ago, and it wasn't in this chapter, but I think it holds truth, is that people will die for their reputation. I mean, that's how strong this is. That's amazing. And people get in feuds, they have grudges, they get into wars. People kill each other over these things. This happens. And so, it's really, to me that gives the gravity of the situation of just, wow, how can your mind get so bent out of shape? And look how far it can go in some situations. So that to me was like a wake-up call. So then, what this chapter spends a lot of time talking about is how we are so easily manipulated. And I was thinking, who's really the crazy one here? Like when she said, we think the author is nuts because he's saying speak of their good qualities. But the more I thought about it, I thought, well, who's really the crazy one here? It's like, oh, it's these thoughts that, these reactions, these are the things that are most crazy in the situation. It's like the teachings in Shantideva where he says, only your own mind can send you to the hell realms, for example, or put you in really, really bad situations. The worst that can happen with any other creature on this earth is that you might get killed. Like an elephant could. This way, I think his example is an elephant could kill you, but only your own mind can do the greatest harm to ourselves. And that's really, when I thought, well, who's the crazy one here? I'm like, yeah, that's these looking at these two mind states, that is a little crazy. So one of the main points of this chapter was just how easily we're manipulated. And so what Venerable said again and again in here is like, we fall for people who say these kind words to us, regardless of what their motivation is. They might be scheming us. It's like letting a thief into your house and saying, hey, here's the silver, here, have it. And I remember, it reminded me of what at one of our monastic gatherings, a Theravada monk that I met said this. He said something to the effect of, here's the way our mind can work sometimes. Tell me you love me. I know it's not true, but tell me you love me anyway. I was like, yeah, this is that mind. That's where your attachment is like trumping your wisdom, And this is, where we come from. I mean, think about that. It's like, yeah, that works. I can see where that happens a lot in the world. So, if somebody praises us, then we like them. And even though we don't know what their motivation is, and they might be, scamming us or whatever. So, and then, the really, the part that really hurts us the most, I would say, is the reverse of that, is when people are trying to help us, and we see their help as harm. We can't we impute their motivations as being poor. We react to the things they say, and that's where in the example I gave up was just the example I was giving up. That's good Freudian slip. I hope I can give up that example, so it doesn't have any charge for me anymore. As I understand it, I think it does. But anyway, when we look at examples in our lives, we can see that we just get furious about these things, and we can, we can lose our friendships, and actually these are oftentimes the people that are closest to us and are actually trying to help us, but we can't see other people's motivations. And that's a really important thing to remember when you have difficult interactions with others. That's one thought to bring to mind that is really, really helpful immediately. It's like, okay, I always say to myself, I'm perceiving harm. I never say what they're doing this is harmful. I always say to myself, I'm perceiving harm, because I just have learned so time and again, first from an answering machine of listening to a message and watching my mind get reactive to it, and then listening to it again and like, what was I reacting to? So that was like a reality check for me. But we do this all the time. So it's helpful I find, to say, I'm perceiving harm. I'm maybe experiencing it in that way because of my perception. And then just really in the next breath, like, I don't really know what the person's motivation is here. At least give them the benefit of the doubt. And that really gives our mind more space. It's much better than ranting and raving about things. Why are you criticizing me? So in the case of our spiritual growth, this is kind of the role sometimes of the teacher. We can't see our faults, and that's one of the problems in this whole scenario is our pride. When we don't recognize when pride is functioning in us often, because it's difficult to recognize, as is jealousy. But the pride factor that's going on sometimes, when it's active, we actually can't see our own faults. So then other people who care about us, because they see we're doing things that are going to harm us, both maybe even the short term and the long term spiritually, when you think of the karma that we create with some of the things we do in our lives. So they're trying to help us, and we just can't take it in. And this is one of the, I think this actually contributes a lot to this attachment to reputation, is the ignorance that has, the ignorance of pride, because pride is kind of based on ignorance, essentially. And I think that's kind of functioning kind of underneath. So we're not really recognizing maybe even the compassion that the other person was having. So, basically in my kind of thoughts about this, as I was saying, people will do all sorts of things, have wars, grudges, and everything. So this happens a lot in families and in communities and this and that. And so, when I was when I was bringing this up, what was striking to me about this situation, and why I've kind of thought about it for some years actually, is that it was clear to me at the time that the person was trying to help me. I could actually even feel the kindness in what I was seeing and what I was hearing. But what was said was so hard for me to hear that I actually went away and I got very upset, and I actually made some kind of, I would say, I don't want to say vow, but I made a really strong resolution not to let this happen again. And then I spent years trying to figure out, what was I doing there? What was happening in my mind? And I understand it a lot better now. And over the years, we kind of laugh. We have this expression, seeing help as harm. And, and a lot of things, when I have small little reactions to things around here, or just before I lived here, whatever, I can see that now, that sometimes just because of habitual patterns, my initial reaction might be, oh, I'm seeing this as harmful, and actually the person's trying to help me. In fact, they might even be doing something that's directly trying to help me, but I'm not liking the way they're doing it, or something, small like that. So this expression, seeing help as harm, is something that I use a lot. And in this situation, that was kind of one level of it, But later, and especially this winter, I actually got in touch with kind of like what it feels like when you're kind of deeply offended about something. And these are kind of what we're talking about here when we're talking about attachment to reputation. And so, and what is happening there? It's like, I think they're thinking this about me. Once again, it's a self-centered thought, running the show, and so as I was saying, I would have all these completely different interpretations of this or situations similar to it when I would have different states of mind. And so, it was clear to me that, when the one state of mind is happening, we're kind of in what we call inappropriate attention, where we're kind of writing dramas about it, the stories and everything. But what I couldn't really answer was, what is it that I'm trying to protect here? Because that's kind of one of the things talked about in the writings on this verse is we're trying to protect our reputation. What is it I'm trying to protect? Who am I protecting also? But I was more thinking about what. And so, it kind of got me in touch with, okay, beneath anger is usually sadness or fear. Okay, so I think there could be an unrecognized fear of harm, active, But even, if you've thought about something like difficult situations in your life, or like, our job here is to try to understand our minds, and so I take this out as it's a ready example for me to learn about myself with. And so what kind of surprises me about it is that I have looked at this example, sometimes here and there, and looked at it quite closely, and I have a certain level of understanding of it, I have the self-centered thought that arises, I have anger that arises, I have attachment that arises, all this stuff. But what is funny to me is that, and I recognize maybe the fear and that, certain words, like I remember in that situation, I later read in a lot of our scriptures, these exact words are used, but I wasn't familiar with these words. It was kind of like if you read some of the Pali Canon, you'll see the Buddha calling you foolish, whatever, and that wasn't the word that was used, but it was like, are you fool, or something like that. We just don't use these words too much in our day-to-day conversation. But in this conversation, I realized, wow, these are the words that are in our scriptures, but I'm not used to them. Okay, I reacted. That was like a stimulus or whatever. But even knowing all this and looking at it, why does this still arise? That was like puzzling to me. Like, yeah, we learn a lot of these things, and we look at them again and again, and they still arise. And part of it, of course, is habituation, and I would say part of it is our previous karma ripening, like I created the cause for this, now I'm experiencing the results, things like that. But what helped me the most to understand my actual, when I'm analyzing something, I'm working on it in a way where, where I'm able to look at these two states of mind, for example. I don't see that so much as a ripening of that karma happening. I see it as I'm deeply to my level, trying to probe this thing. And what works for me to understand this is why this looks this way in my mind, is that the way our minds function, and it's something that Jeffrey Hopkins explained to us. And so in my simple terminology, I would say that the afflictions in our mind, when they're present, they color the mind. And so we don't really have clarity and wisdom on board then so much, because we're disturbed by the afflictions. That's their nature. They are disturbing to the mind. So confusion and other, afflictions, they cause the mind to be disturbed. So that's kind of one way to say it. Another way is the analogy that Jeffrey gave us is like in the Buddhist psychology, they have this understanding of mind that how the mind kind of works, is that you can think of it like you have a box and you're shining all these flashlights into it, and what you see in there is this illumination, right? You don't see all the individual flashlights. You see that this box is illuminated, and this is how our parts of our mind, our main consciousnesses and our mental factors, the basic units, you might say, of the mind. When they function, they're all functioning together like these little flashlights, and you have then the whole illumination of what your experience is, you could say. So if one of those factors is quite intense, like the anger factor, then it actually permeates all the others. So here's how this is explained. This might be technical for some people, but I think most people in here can rock this. So this is from one of Jeffrey Hopkins' books, where it's probably a translation, you know. But he says, in Walking Through Walls, he says, many mental factors accompany any main mind, and whatever object is observed by any one of them is observed by all the others. For example, this mental factor of wisdom, it accompanies the main mind, but it engages by its own power in differentiating phenomena. So, you know, you have your main consciousness, your mental consciousness, and then you have this mental factor of wisdom, and its little function is it discriminates things, you know, it discriminates phenomena. But these two are, they're working, you know, they're, how would you say, the main mind, okay, let me just read how he has it, because he's much more clear than I could be. Thus, the main mind itself also differentiates phenomena, but does not do so by its own power. It does so by way of the force of the mental factor of wisdom. So it's kind of like two flashlights, and they're joined together with an illumination, in a sense. One illumination, you know, looking at the bottom of that box. So then when a pleasant feeling or a blissful feeling arises, because in this book they're talking about meditation and some of the blissful experiences that come up. So let's say when a pleasant feeling accompanies the main mind, it's not only the factor of feeling that experiences the pleasure, because in the Buddhist psychology, feeling is not emotion. Feeling is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And we have this going on all the time. It's always there. So what he's saying is that when the blissful or pleasant feeling accompanies the main mind, it's not only the factor of feeling that experiences this pleasantness. The main mind does also. But its experience of pleasantness is not by its own power. A main mind and its accompanying mental factors, these parts of the mind, they have 5 similar associations. And this means that whatever one experiences, the other does also. Whatever one observes, the other also observes, and so forth. So actually, when we're like looking at something, our main consciousness might see in general there's something there, but it's, so I see this gong there, but it's these other factors that say, oh, it's this shape, it's black, it's this, it's black. You know, it discriminates, you know, it's well made, it's this kind of metal or whatever. There's some kind of discrimination that's happening that's separate from that. In my experience of, oh, I like it, I don't like it, it brings, you know, it's a pleasant feeling. That's the feeling component. All those kind of mix due to the force of how they interact with each other. So then he goes on, the difference is that a certain mental factor observes or feels by its own power, and the others do so by the power of that mental factor. That factor of feeling, experiencing pleasure occurs through its own power. The main mind that accompanies it has that same feeling of pleasure, but it's due to the fact that it's accompanying it. It doesn't have it by its own power. Is that making sense, kind of? It's the flashlights are a little bit easier, but basically the things mix, and so when I look at my experience, like, oh yeah, that's what's going on here. No wonder when my mind has the interpretation that brings up anger, it has affliction in it. Then there's no way I can see things the other way, because everything in my mind is colored by that. That's why I use the simple terminology. My mind is colored by that affliction, like these flashlights coming together. This is how it works. And this is a really good thing to understand, because then it helps clear up, for me, some of the confusion of like, wow, why can this look so differently when I have these different states of mind? You know, and it's because, wow, that's how the mind works. So that's a good thing to know. We can use that a lot to our advantage, because we can see that then the criteria that we're using when we discriminate friends, enemies, and strangers, it's kind of out to lunch, because we're making a discrimination. They aren't that from their own side. We have these things going on in our mind. They all get together like having a big powwow, and it's like, yeah, I don't like that person. They're a jerk. You know, every part of the mind there, if it's a strong enough thing, it can kind of take it over. And that's what you can see what happens when you've had really strong states of any emotion. They take over the mind. And you can see how anger gets people into trouble, because it can take over and then the other parts aren't really there to help you, like your wisdom, your sense of caution, your judgment, So this happens not just with anger, but anger is a good example because it's something that, we all experience and recognize usually, not all the time, but a lot of the time. So, yeah, there we are. Somebody's trying to say something helpful to us and we're reactive because we aren't seeing our own faults and yada yada. So then what's nice in this chapter is there's kind of solutions to this. It's one level to have an understanding, well, that's how my mind works. But it's, to me, like there's different layers of how we can understand ourselves. And so what's nice in this chapter was, I thought, was this part about, well, how can we really do this different? Like how, and the advice was, we need to really assess ourselves in a more reliable way. And so this is where, our practice is really beneficial to us because of course we need to learn these things and think about them, and then we need to sit on the cushion with them and actually really try to penetrate them a little bit more. And these kind of things, for things that are kind of dug in deep, like the attachment to reputation that's so hard to overcome, I think they actually take these kind of tools where you can go a little bit deeper. And so one level is to really be able to assess ourselves more realistically. So, what qualities do I have? And what are my weaknesses? What do I need to focus on to improve? What good qualities do I have that I can enhance? Because everyone has good qualities and everybody has faults. It's just, the way it is. And it's a discussion we've had here a few times is, in living here, some of us have realized that, we really got along with people quite well. And we were pretty much people pleasers. And when we didn't get along with people, we just didn't go back to those situations. It's, when this person's kind of a drag, I don't think I'm going to make any point of seeing that person again. Like if I work in this building and this person kind of disturbs me, I think I'll just go in the other door and I don't have to see them. And, easy like that. And what some of us have realized in moving here is that, no, I didn't have some of the problems I have. I didn't recognize these problems that I have, before. Oh, well, I'm living with a bunch of people that I don't know. And then, we get to know all of our faults and all of our qualities, and we get to really see ourselves more. And it's like, wow, that's eye-opening. Like, I think I used to remove myself from certain kinds of situations.
We all would have left a long time.
And now I'm going to have to actually learn something about myself and see my own faults. Fun. But, it's kind of like somebody saying, in some sense, they're saying, oh, you have a big nose. Well, I either have a big nose or I don't have a big nose. I can kind of decide that for myself. I don't really have to get upset when somebody says that to me. I can just look in the mirror. Okay, do I have this quality or don't I? And this is one of the problems with our culture, and maybe more so for women, but I don't know. I don't think so. I've heard it said, but I don't think so. It's kind of being people pleasers, And I didn't ever get this before until just recently. Venerable was pointing out quite directly that a person who is a people pleaser, well, a long time ago, it made quite clear that actually it's your self-centered thought that makes you do that, because you're not really caring for the other person in that instance. You're trying to be comfortable, essentially, or something. You're doing something to benefit yourself. But then the other kind of bummer about it is that it shreds your self-confidence, because you're actually doing this thing with your, all our sense consciousness look outward, but actually we're doing it now with our mental consciousness, and we're like, if I please that person, I'm a good person. If I don't please them, I get upset. It's like we're putting our sense of self-confidence in what the other person's reaction is to us. Well, that's really going to be a nightmare. Because everybody else's thoughts, when you think of what reputation is other people's thoughts about you. Now you think about your own experience with people that you know quite well. One moment you're friends, another moment you're enemies, and another moment you don't want to have anything to do with them, or you're just like strangers to each other. All in one day, you can go through all those states of mind with somebody. So we have, in a sense, we've let that our reaction to them and what they say to us, because we're doing that based on what they say to us, influence what we think about even ourselves. And so, rather than do that, why don't we sit down and, look at ourselves, like, it really helps, like the meditation you did this morning, for example. That's one really good example, because you did mind is the source of happiness and pain. It turns you from thinking about what they said, to like, wow, what was my reaction? What was my internal experience? What were my emotions? What was this? And now you turn the mirror and look at yourself. And there you can start seeing your qualities, you can start seeing your faults, and you can get a much more realistic view. And then when the person says, oh, you have a big nose, you're like, well, okay, yeah, I have a big nose. Or like, no, I don't have a big nose. Either way, you're within yourself then, in terms of what's going on. You're not so reactive. So I think that's really pragmatic. And so we need to spend some time to do that. The other thing is by looking at our motivations, because this happens like a lot in our daily lives, that we try to do something to help somebody, for example. Or maybe even we're doing something that's kind of neutral, but somebody else gets upset with us, like they don't like the way you take out the garbage, they don't like the way you sort the recycling, they don't like this, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. And if you can get really reactive to these kind of things, and so instead what we can do is, in those situations, and even with this one, with somebody's broadcasting something about you, be it true or not, throughout the 3,000 worlds, we can look at, well, what was really going on within me, and what was my motivation for, like, say you did even something that was, horrible, okay? Say you did something that was horrible. If you really look at that, that you deem as horrible, let's put it that way, because there's just things that we do, right? And so if you really tear these things apart, you can and look at all the causes and conditions that bring you to any moment of your life, you have a much broader perspective and a much more realistic perspective. And you can use that to your benefit, because you can see, even when you've done things where your motivation was poor and you would like to have done it differently, you can help to see yourself, well, how did I get to that place? And how might I do that differently? And instead of like casting yourself as some, horrible person, you're just like, wow, look at the states of mind that I had that led me to this, having this motivation that wasn't so good. A lot of our motivations are mixed, or they start off good and then they kind of slide. So this is a really fruitful thing to do when you take time each day to, just like we take time to eat, to sleep, maybe to exercise, hopefully. We need to take time with ourselves to work on our minds for our own mental health. And this is one thing to do when disturbing situations come up in the day, is do that meditation that we did this morning. It's a very profound meditation. It has many levels that help us to understand ourselves and the teachings. It's one that many of us here have used a lot. And even, sometimes when you do that meditation, it all comes out quite nicely, You get the conclusion that you're supposed to get, but sometimes it doesn't come out that way. And that's actually really fruitful to look at too. Don't feel like you aren't doing the meditation right. Just look at what is it I need to learn here, and maybe even get some help to, understand how I could look at these things differently and use these tools better, because sometimes that's why we need spiritual mentors and spiritual friends. So this thing with people pleasing, this happens in a way because we're out of touch with ourselves. We're kind of putting everything on, others, rather than kind of holding our own sense of person. So if we have trouble with that, or we see that our motivations are mixed or whatever, we need to spend time trying to discern really what's going on. I think I've made that pretty clear. When I do this, one thing I find with the thing with people-pleasing is that I kind of have these two ditches. And one is the people-pleasing ditch. And if I try to pull myself out of that, because that was really the way I was raised, and I'm pretty sure I functioned like that a lot in my life, then I go to this other ditch sometimes, which is kind of like being indifferent, because I can't find the middle ground. And you really, you have to find in your own experience, like what happens when you, okay, I'm not going to do this, but maybe the way I'm going to go about it puts me in another ditch. Even this week, I was reading some of the safe responses, and the course I'm facilitating is on refuge, and the person was realizing, wow, I'm using refuge in the wrong way. What I'm doing is I'm actually using refuge as a protection, but what I'm doing is I'm running away from situations and I'm hiding. Well, that's kind of like you're out of one ditch and you've put yourself in another ditch. And we have to kind of look for that, because our mind easily, it's hard for us sometimes to find, really what's the way we want to be moving in certain difficult situations. So that, as time goes by, if you continue to, take time to assess these things, it works itself out. You usually can get the resources and the guidance and the develop your own wisdom about these things. And then, if you think about it, when you are able to do this and have that, allows your mind to be much more calm because you're not so reactive, then you might be in the situation where you could see the other person's good qualities, which is what the verse is asking us to do. So we need to create that space in our own minds, to be able to do that. And they want us to do that with a compassionate, loving heart. That's the thing to remember. So that's that whole thing that I was saying before, anger, loving kindness. You can't hold those states of mind at the same time. So when you recognize that you're having difficulty, able to see another's good qualities, then you might have to clear out some of the things that are, the afflictions that are getting in the way, so that you can do that. So, because you could, oftentimes, we're just have a projection that we're holding, oh, that person's a jerk. Well, there's all levels of anger. It doesn't have to be like rage. It can be just like irritation. Even then, sometimes it will be hard, so you have to take time to look. Another way that they help us to think about that is maybe drop the situation for that person and just think about in general, if you're following this particular path, we have the recognition that every sentient being has the Buddha nature. So you use some of these things in the teachings to help you to kind of break through some of these things. So, okay, maybe that person isn't showing their kindness to me in this moment, but one way to look at it, if we've had beginningless lives, they've probably been in all kinds of relationships with us, and at some time they were a very nurturing person. Just now, in this particular instance, not so kind. But I don't have to make that the whole of this being, that are inherently unkind. No, all these factors came together and boom, here's this situation, and I'm perceiving it this way. But you need to, making the mind more expansive is one of the most useful tools I learned when I went to psychotherapy. That's the thing I noticed that this therapist helped me with, is for me to broaden my outlook. And no matter how she went about it, it was always a factor of my mind getting more vast, more open, more broad. And these kind of thoughts help us to do that. Anger makes the mind very narrow. And then when we let that down and we have more calmness in the mind, it widens out. But then using these things that kind of even expand the mind, like even our wish to, develop bodhicitta, that's so expansive. And you can use these things to make the mind, more open and broad. So then, okay, now I can turn my attention to this person who I'm having difficulty with a mind that has a little more space, because I've used things to, work at it from my own side. So if we also recognize that our notion of reputation, it really has no ultimate value. It's just people's thoughts. And they change all the time. And our thoughts are pretty fickle. We know that for our own selves. We have ideas about something today and we change them tomorrow, and both times we were right. So, that's what's happening when somebody is, when we're, somebody's judging us, we think we're they're interfering with our reputation. So rather than clinging to that, where we can take things very personally, and even if it's a misunderstanding, we can take things very personally, then, instead of taking things as a personal affront, see that there's different ways to work with this. One of the verses from Matisha says something like seeing it as an echo. I think that was in this chapter. Oh yeah, it was from Transforming Adversity into Joy and Courage. I think it was there where he gave some verses from Tisha says, when we hear unpleasant things said about us, think it's not true in the way it was heard, like an echo. And so there's a lot of ways I think you could think about that verse. One is that these are just sound waves, and here I am reacting to a bunch of sound waves, and that could, you go like, I don't think I need to do that. Another way is like, oh, I'm perceiving it this way because I've created the causes in the past. Because that's a bigger picture, bigger view idea, like, wow, why am I experiencing this in this way? Like the meditation you did this morning, when something disturbing happens, why am I experiencing this way? That's the feeling component. Karma often ripens in the feeling component. So that means that when there's contact, like I see this, whatever, oh, okay, I hear these words said about me, that's the contact, the words go in. I generate a feeling automatically. And in Buddhist thought, you can't actually control that part. It's what happens after that. Okay, so then you're going to experience it as unpleasant. But that experience of it being unpleasant goes so fast that we just go quickly into all sorts of reactions. And that's where we want to try to catch this and say, wow, someone else might hear those same words and they might construe it completely. They might have a completely different experience. It's like when people go to the movies. Everyone has a different experience of the movie. I hated it, I loved it, all that. Same thing. Somebody says something and another person might not find it, offensive at all, whereas you found it offensive. This is this thing with the feeling component. It comes up to you as unpleasant. Why? In part because you've done this action or something like it in the past. You've done it completely with all the branches needed to have a complete karma, and now it's ripening, and now you're experiencing this. This is the really central thought in Buddhist thought, is that we experience the results of our previous actions, unless we do something to purify them, and they ripen in the feeling component. So therefore, we experience things because we've created the cause. So in some way, then you can think, wow, instead of the person who's at fault in this situation, this is something that I recognize, I've learned in coming here a little bit. Something would happen, and I would think to myself, why am I kind of like feeling like the negative person here? Like I feel like I'm getting in trouble, and I didn't do anything. I'm not the one who caused this thing, right? This situation happens, somebody else does something, and then but I'd get upset about it, right? I would experience it in a certain way and get upset about it. And then I would get upset at being upset. And what other people are like, why is this happening? I didn't do anything here. And it's actually, when you think about when somebody's trashing your reputation, well, actually, who's the person who caused that? In some sense, your experiences are caused by what you've done previously. So one way to look at that is I caused it. I created the cause for this. The substantial cause was an action I did in the past. This is just the conditions happening now, and I'm experiencing it in this way. And this is how bodhisattvas think. They think so differently from how we do. When they think about even this practice, like so far, and even in this chapter, it was pretty much geared towards how I can deal with this for myself. But how would a bodhisattva deal with this? They would think, wow, look at this. I created the situation, and now this other person is doing this negative act. It's kind of all these conditions are coming together, right? And this person is part of now in my little sphere of karma ripening. I'm the one who did the substantial cause here for experiencing this way. They're just a little stimulus for it. And now they're kind of drug into my karmic, story. And so, that's one way that you can think about this, so that you can, why? Because you actually care about that other person. You don't want to drag people into these situations. This leads people to be very unhappy, with these kind of situations. So we want to try to think more like a bodhisattva. So like what His Holiness says is, okay, on a worldly level, when somebody, says something like this in the 3,000 worlds about us, we feel like we need to defend ourselves. But that's more like on, a worldly level. From the point of view of a bodhisattva, we're supposed to respect them and praise their qualities. And why do we do that? Because as a bodhisattva, we don't want them to be unhappy. We don't want the conflicts to escalate, and because that's not good for anyone, and it's not good for that person. So there's more now as a bodhisattva. When you do the last verse of this is the practice of bodhisattvas. Their practice of bodhisattvas is to think about other people. So one way that this might manifest, you could think like, well, then how about all these, even like His Holiness, he's got now, you would say, wealth, he's got great reputation, he's got power. That doesn't seem very bodhisattva-like, right? But actually, bodhisattvas need to come back in situations where they have these things, because this gives them the tools to help other people. And what's different about them than a worldly way of having these things is they're actually using them to benefit others. And so this is the mind that we want to try to develop in this. It's the same thing that the Buddha did. He had this worldly life with a great reputation, with all of the, women, money, pleasures, everything. And he left the whole thing. And why did he do it? He even left his child. Why did he do it? Did he do it because he was like a dropout dad, or whatever that expression is? Deadbeat dad. Do you think that was what the Buddha's motivation was? I don't have enough for this kid and I'm out of here. No way. The Buddha actually, his mind was so broad that he saw that, wow, everyone, even my little boy, my wife, everyone I'm around, everyone is suffering. I need to do something about this. I'm going to find a way to solve this problem. So he did it for others. So, yeah. So you think about it, when you bring that back to the situation of reputation, if we react, this is what Shantideva spends a lot of time saying, it's like, our practice is when these kind of words come to us, is not to give the same thing back, right? And so if we do that, if we give back negativity in these kind of situations, how are we ever going to be able to help that person as a bodhisattva? They're going to be upset with us. If we, especially with something, a reputation that runs so deep, maybe we'll then try to ruin their reputation. Think about it if you were trying to be a spiritual mentor to somebody. Would you want to go to that person? How would you be able to help somebody if they were worried about their reputation? Reputation runs very deep. When we think about our practice and what we want to try to, when we really think of what our capability is, we can say, wow, how am I going to help all these sentient beings with this bodhicitta motivation if I just want to retaliate? I won't be able to help them. They're going to be upset, they're not going to trust me, and I'll have no great way to be of benefit to them. So, that's the kind of thinking that we want to try to cultivate. Bodhicitta has a basis of compassion, but it's actually, it's so expansive that you actually want to do, because you're so concerned about the other people's suffering, and you are willing to take on the responsibility to try to free them of their suffering, you actually realize that the only way you can do it is to become a Buddha. And so it's these two things, wishing to relieve suffering and wanting to become a Buddha, put together as bodhicitta. Okay, so just to take us back to the very beginning, because I thought this was kind of, the meditators in the cave, right? So concerned about reputation, or Geshe Sonam Rinchen says that they're that's such a deep concern of ours, a hard thing to get rid of. I thought I would just read what he says about this in closing. Okay, Letting go of our preconception with the things of this life involves giving up the 8 worldly concerns, which in short depends on overcoming attachment to food, clothing, and reputation. Many meditators, scholars, and monks happily forego good food and clothing and live a simple life, yet they remained attached to a good reputation, which is the hardest to give up. Above the entrance to the cave, it might say, "Retreat in progress, do not disturb." But inside, the retreatant is hoping for recognition as a great meditator. The scholar has hopes of acclaim for his great knowledge, and the monk for his pure morality. Such thoughts attract obstacles and prevent anything valuable from being accomplished. That's a really huge point. This is like, it just takes everything apart for us. If letting go of our attachment is the door to pure practice, we must look and see within where we stand. It's not easy to be a true practitioner. In his letter to a friend, Nagarjuna says, "Worldly wise one, the 8 worldly concerns are getting and not getting, happiness and unhappiness, fame and disrepute, praise and blame. Without letting them be object of your mind, treat them as the same. As long as you are pleased when receiving gifts and rewards, to be happy, well thought of, or praised, displeased when you do not receive rewards and material gains, when you are unhappy, ill thought of, or criticized. These considerations will influence your feelings and actions. No matter how carefully or intensely you perform practices, they will be of no real benefit. It's essential to stop the habit of thinking, if I could only have this, everything would be fine." That's what Lama Tsongkhapa calls the great desire. And this is what attachment is, and that's one of the worst ones. If I could only have this, everything would be fine. So we really have to be on the guard against this. And so when we are able to try to uproot these kinds of attachment and seeing that reputation is the deepest one, we will be removing obstacles to our own spiritual practice. So that's really, kind of the point I'd like to leave on.